good. Come up to the fire, ladies.
I'm not cold.
Now, Mr. Hale, before we move things about, you explain to Mr. Henderson just what you saw when you came here yesterday morning.
By the way, has anything been moved? Are things just as you left them yesterday?
Well, it's just about the same. You went and dropped below zero last night. I thought I'd better send Frank out this morning to make a fire for us. No use getting pneumonia with the big case on, but I told him not to touch anything except the stove, and well, oh, hell, you know Frank.
Somebody should have been left here.
Oh, yesterday. Oh, when I had to send Frank to Morris Center for that man who went crazy. Look, I want you to know I had my hands full yesterday. Now, I knew you could get back from Omaha by today, and as long as I went over everything here myself, I knew it would be just fine.
Well, Mr. Hale, tell us what happened when you came here yesterday morning.
Well, Harry and I started down the road to load potatoes. Just we got along the road by my place, I said, I'm going to go see if I can't get John Wright to go with me on the party telephone. I talked about it right once before, he kind of put me off, saying both talk too much anyways. All he really wanted was some peace and quiet. I guess you knew how much he liked to keep to himself, but I thought if I went about it for his wife and his own home, though I said...
Let's talk about that later, Mr. Hale. I do want to talk about that, but tell now just what happened when you got to the house.
Well, I didn't hear or see anything. I knocked on the door and it still was all quiet inside. I knew they must be up. It was past 8 o'clock, so I knocked again. I thought I heard somebody say come in. I wasn't sure. I'm not sure yet. But I opened the door. Next door. Right there in that rocker sat Miss Wright.
What was she doing?
Well, she was rocking back and forth. She had a raker in her hand and she was sort of beating it.
And how did she look?
Why? She looked queer.
How do you mean queer?
Like she didn't know what she was going to do next and all kinds of done up.
How did you seem to feel about your coming?
Well, I don't think she minded one way or another. She didn't pay much attention. I said, "How do, Miss Wright? It's cold, ain't it?" She said, "Is it?" And just went on bleeding out her apron. Well, I was surprised. She didn't ask me to come up to the stove or to sit down. Just sat there, rocking back and forth, not even looking at me. I thought of Harry and the team outside, so I said a little sharp, "Can't I see John?" "No," she said, kind of dull laughed. "Well, ain't he home?" I asked her. "Yes," she said, "he's home." "Then why can't I see him?" I asked her out of patience. "Because he's dead," she said. "Dead?" says I. She just nodded her head, not getting a bit excited, rocking back and forth. "Well, where is he?" I asked her, not knowing what else to say. She just pointed up the stairs like that. Well, I ran for the stairs, the idea of getting up there. I walked from there to here, and then I says, "Well, what'd he die of?" "He died of a rope around his neck," said she. I didn't know what to say. I went outside to get Harry. I thought I might need help. We went upstairs, and there he was lying.
I think I'd rather have you go into that upstairs where you pointed out. Just go on now with the rest of your story.
Well, my first thought was to get the rope off. It worked. But Harry went right on up to him, and he said, "No, he's dead all right. We better not touch anything." So we came back downstairs. She was still sitting that same way. "Has anybody been notified?" I asked her. "No," she says, unconcerned. "Well, who did this, Miss Wright?" said Harry. He said it all business-like. At that, she stopped bleeding of her apron. "I don't know," she says. "You don't know?" says Harry. "No," she says. "Were you sleeping in the bed with him?" says Harry. "Yes," she says, "but I was on the inside. Somebody slipped a rope around his neck and you didn't wake up," says Harry. "I didn't wake up," she says. "Well, we must have looked like we didn't see how that could be, because after a minute," she said, "I sleep sound." Harry wanted to ask more questions, but I thought we ought to let her take her story to the sheriff and the coroner first. So Harry ran as fast as he could to River's place where there's a telephone.
And what did Mrs. Wright do when she knew you had gone for the coroner?
Well, she moved from that rocker to that chair over there. Just sat there with her hands in her lap, looking down. Got the feeling I ought to make some conversation, so I said I came to see if John Wright wanted to put in the telephone, and at that she laughed. And then she looked at me scared. Maybe it wasn't scared. I wouldn't like to say it was. And then soon Harry came back, and Dr. Lloyd came to you, Mr. Peters, and I guess that's all I know that you don't.
I guess we'll go upstairs first, and out to the barn and around there. You're convinced that there's nothing important here? Nothing that would point to any motive?
Well, there's nothing here but kitchen things.
nice mess.
Oh, her fruit, it did freeze. She worried about that when it turned so cold. She said the fire would go out and the jars would break.
Well, can you beat the woman? Held for murder and worrying about her preserves.
I'm afraid before we're through, she may have something more serious than preserves to worry.
Well, women are used to worrying over fire.
And yet, for all their worries, what can you do without the ladies? Dirty towels. Not much of a housekeeper. What do you say, ladies?
There's a great deal of work to be done on the farm.
To be sure, and yet I know there are some Dixon County farmhouses which do not have such roller towels.
Those towels get dirty awful quick. Men's hands aren't always as clean as they might be.
Ah, loyal to your senses. And you and Mrs. Wright were friends. I suppose you were neighbors too.
I haven't seen much of her of late years. I've not been in this house since more than a year.
And why was that? You didn't like her?
I liked her oh well enough. Farmers' wives have their hands full, Mr. Henderson, and then
Yes.
it's not a very cheerful place.
No, it's not cheerful. I shouldn't say she had much of the homemaking instinct.
Well, I don't know as Wright had either.
You mean that they didn't get on very well?
No, I don't mean anything. I don't see how a place could be any cheerfuler for John Wright's
I'd like
in
to
it.
talk more of that a little later. I want to get the lay of things upstairs now.
Wait, well, now I suppose anything Mrs. Peters does would be all right. Now she was to take in some clothes for her, you know, the few little things. But you left in such a hurry yesterday.
Yes, but I would like to see what you take, Mrs. Peters. And keep an eye out for anything that may be of use to us.
Yes, Mr. Henderson.
I'd hate to have men coming into my kitchen snooping around and criticizing.
Of course, it's no more than her beauty.
Duty's all right, but I guess that deputy sheriff that came out to make the fire might have gotten a little of this on. Wish I thought of that sooner. Seems mean to talk about it, but now having things slipped up when she had to come away in such a hurry.
She had bread set.
Oh. She was going to put this in there. It's a shame about a fruit. I wonder if it's all gone. I think there's some in here that's all right, Mrs. Peters. Yes, here. Oh, this is cherries, too. Oh, that's a clear believe that's the only one. She'll feel awful bad after all the hard work and the hot weather. I remember the afternoon I put in my cherries last summer.
Well, I must get those things from the front room closet. You coming with me, Mrs. Hale? You can help me carry them. Oh my, it's cold in there.
That was close. I think maybe that's why she kept so much to herself. She didn't even belong to the ladies' aid. I suppose she felt she couldn't do her part well. Don't enjoy things when you feel shabby. I heard she used to wear pretty clothes and be lively. When she was Minnie Foster, one of the town girls singing in the choir. That was 30 years ago. Is this all you want to take in?
She said she wanted an apron. Funny thing to want for there isn't much to get you dirty in jail, goodness knows. But I suppose, just to make her feel more natural. She said that was in the top drawer in this cupboard. Yes, here. And her little shawl that always hung behind the door. Yes, here it is.
Mrs. Peters,
Yes, Mrs. Hale.
do you think she did it?
Well, I don't know.
Well, I don't think she did. Asking for an apron and a little shawl weren't about her fruit.
Mr. Peters says it looks bad for her. Mr. Henderson is awful sarcastic in his speech and will make fun of her for saying she didn't wake up.
Well, I guess John Wright didn't wait when they were slipping the rope under his neck.
No, it's strange. It must have been done awful crafty and still. They say it was such a funny way to kill a man.
all up like that? That's just what Mr. Hale said. There was a gun in the house. He says that's what he can't understand.
Mr. Henderson said coming out that what was needed for the case was a motive, something to show anger or certain feeling.
Well, I don't see any signs of anger around here. Oh, it's white to here. I wonder how they are finding things upstairs. I hope she had a little more red up there. You know, it seems kind of sneaking. Locking her up in town and then coming out here trying to turn the whole house against her.
But Mrs. Hale, the law is the law.
I suppose it is. Better loosen up your things, Mrs. Peters. You won't feel them when you go out.
She was piecing a quilt.
It's a lock hat pattern. Pretty, isn't it? I wonder if she was going quilting, just nodding.
Oh, they wonder if she was going to quilt it or just not.
Frank's fire didn't do much up there, did it? Let's go out to the barn and get that cleared up.
I don't see as there's anything so strange. I'll take it up our time with little things while waiting for them to get the evidence. I don't see how it's anything to laugh about.
Of course, they've got awful important things on their minds.
Mrs. Peters, look at this one. Here, this is the one she was working on. And look at the sewing. Oh, the rest of it has been so nice and even. And then look at this. Why, it's all over the place. It's as if she didn't know what she was about.
Oh, what are you doing, Mrs. Hale?
I'm just fixing a stitch or two. That's not so very good. That sew knows my fidgeting.
I don't think we ought to touch things.
I'll just finish up this end. Mrs. Peters.
Yes, Mrs. Hale.
What do you suppose she was so nervous about?
I don't know. I don't know if she was nervous. I sometimes so awful queer when I'm just tired. Well, I must get these things wrapped up. They may be through sooner than we think. I wonder where I can find a piece of paper and some string.
In that cupboard, maybe.
Why, here's a bird cage.
Did she have a bird, Mrs. Hale? Oh, I don't know if she did. I haven't been here in so long. There was a man around this time last year selling canaries for cheap. I don't know if she got one. Maybe she did. She used to sing real pretty herself.
Funny to think of a bird here. But she must have had one, or else why would she have a cage? I wonder what happened to it.
Maybe the cat got it.
No, she didn't have a cat. She's got that feeling some people have about cats, being afraid of them. My cat got in her room one day and she got real upset and asked me to take it out.
My sister Bessie was like that.
Queer, ain't it? Why, look at this door. It's broke. One hinge is pulled apart.
Oh, it looks as if someone's been rough with it.
Why, yes.
I wish if they're going to find any evidence, they'd be more about it. I don't like this place.
But I'm awful glad you came with me, Mrs. Hale. It'd be lonesome for me. Sitting here, alone.
It would, wouldn't it? But I tell you what I do wish, Mrs. Peters. I wish I'd come here sometimes when she was here. I wish I had.
But you were awful busy, Mrs. Hale. What with your house and your children?
I could have come. I stayed away because it weren't cheerful, and that's why I ought to have come. I never liked this place. Maybe because it's down in a hollow where you can't see the road. I don't know what it is, but it's a lonesome place, and it always was. I wish I'd come over to see Minnie Foster sometimes. I can sing now.
Oh, you mustn't reproach yourself, Mrs. Hale. Somehow we just don't see how it is with other folks until something turns up.
Not having children makes less work, but it makes a quiet house. I was right out to work all day, no company when he did come in. Did you know John Wright, Mrs. Peters?
Not to know him. I've seen him in town. They say he was a good man.
Yes. Good. He didn't drink, and he kept his word as well as most, I guess, and paid his debts. But he was a hard man, Mrs. Peters. Just to spend the time of day with him, like a raw wind against a bone. I think she would have wanted a bird, but what do you suppose went with it?
Well, I don't know, unless it got sick and died.
You weren't raised around here, were you? You didn't know her?
Not till they brought her yesterday. She...
Come to think of it, it's kind of like a bird herself. Real sweet and pretty, but can't seem to be fluttered. How she didn't change. Tell you what, Mrs. Peters, why don't you take the quilt in with you? It might take up a mind.
Why, I think that's a real nice idea, Mrs. Hale. There couldn't possibly be any objection to it, could there? Now, just what would I take? I wonder if the patches are here. Thanks.
Here's some red. I expect this has some sewing pins in it. What a pretty box. It looks like something someone will give to you. Maybe the scissors are in here. Well, there's something wrapped up in this piece of silk.
Why, this isn't her scissors.
Oh no, Mrs. Peters,
It's the bird.
oh, but look at it. Look at its neck. Look at its neck, it's all other side too.
Somebody wrung its neck.
Well, ladies, have you decided whether she was going to quilt it or not?
We think she was going to nod it.
Well, that's interesting. I'm sure. Has the bird flown?
We think the cat got it.
Is there a cat?
Oh, well, not now. They're superstitious, you know. They leave.
There's no sign at all of anyone having come from outside their own rope. Now let's go up again and go over it piece by piece. Could have been someone who just...
She liked the bird. She was going to bury it in that pretty box.
When I was a girl, my kitten, there was a boy who took a hatchet, and before my eyes and before I could get there, if they hadn't held me back, I would have hurt him.
I wonder how it seemed never to have any children around. No. Right one liked the bird. A thing that sang. She used to sing and he killed that too.
We don't know who killed the bird.
I knew John right.
It was an awful thing was done in this house that night, Mrs. Hale. Killing a man while he slept, slipping a rope around his neck that choked the life out of him.
His neck! Choked the life out of him!
We don't know who killed him. We don't know.
If there'd been years and years of nothing, then a bird to sing to would be awful still. Even after the bird was still.
I know what stillness is!
When we homesteaded in Dakota,
And my first baby died just after he was 2 years old. And me with no other than.
how soon do you suppose they'll be through looking for the evidence?
I know what stillness is. But the law has got to punish crime, Mrs. Hale.
I wish you'd seen Minnie Foster. She wore a white dress, blue ribbons, and stood up there in the choir and sang, "Oh, I wish I'd come over here every once in a while. That was a crime. That was a crime, and who's going to punish that?"
We mustn't take on.
But things can be for women. I tell you, it's queer, Mrs. Peters. We live so close together, but we live so far apart. We all go through the same things. It's all just different kinds of the same things. If I was you, I wouldn't tell her that her fruit was gone. Tell her it ain't. Tell her it's all right. Take this in to prove it to her. She may never know whether it was broken or not.
they just left.
Maybe they would. Maybe they wouldn't.
No, Peters. It's all perfectly clear except the reason for doing it. You know juries when it comes to women. There was some definite thing, something to show. Something to make a story about. A thing that would connect up with this strange way of doing it.
Whew! I got the team out. Pretty cold, ain't it?
I'm gonna stay a while by myself. You can send Frank out to me, can't you? I want to go over everything. I'm not satisfied that we can't do better.
Oh, do you want to see what Mrs. Peters is going to bring in?
Oh, I guess they're not very dangerous things that the ladies have picked out. No, Mrs. Peters doesn't need supervising. For that matter, a sheriff's wife is married to the law. Ever think of it that way, Mrs. Peters?
Not. Just that way.
Married to the law. Well, I just want you to come in here a minute, George. We ought to take a look at these windows.
No, windows.
No, we'll be right out, Mr. Hale.
Well, Henry, at least we found out she wasn't going to Quilted. She was going to, what is it you called it, ladies?
We call it a nodded, Mr. Henderson.